Hello, welcome you to the program today. The title of the sermon, Jesus' Prayer in Gethsemane. It's based on Matthew chapter 26, 36 to 46 in the New King James Version. Today we're going to look at the prayer of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. It's recorded in Matthew 26, 36, Mark 14, 32, Luke 22, 39, and also John 18, verse 1. We see the setting. While learning about what happened that night, we will take the time to note some points that we can make today in application as Christians. Let's begin with the setting. Jesus went from the upper room to the Mount of Olives. According to Luke 22:39, coming out, he went to the Mount of Olives as he was accustomed, and his disciples followed him. And so, according to Luke, he was accustomed to going to the Mount of Olives. It was his custom or habit to go there. And as we will see today, he went to pray. What was the distance from place to place? According to Keener, the background commentary, he said that the walk from the upper room to the Mount of Olives took at least 15 minutes. And so a short time. The Mount of Olives is also called in the New Testament Olivet, or the Mount called Olivet. Luke 19:26 and 21:37. In Acts 1 and verse 12, then they returned to Jerusalem from the Mount called Olivet, which is near Jerusalem, a Sabbath day's journey. Well, what does a Sabbath day journey mean? According to the footnote in the New American Standard Bible, it is about 2,000 cubits. You may know that a cubit was about 18 inches. And so about 0.6 miles or 1 kilometer in today's measurements. And perhaps this would have taken about 15 minutes to walk. Jesus' prayer in Gethsemane took place at night. We know that from the text, the night of his betrayal. This was after he instituted the Lord's Supper in Matthew 26:26 to 30, and before his betrayal and arrest in verses 47 to 56. Let's begin by noting that Jesus was sorrowful in verses 36 to 38. Verse 36, then Jesus came with them to a place called Gethsemane and said to the disciples, sit here while I go and pray over there. After going to the Mount of Olives, Jesus and the 11 disciples, without Judas, arrived at Gethsemane. Mark 14:32, then they came to a place which was called or named Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples, sit here while I pray. Matthew, in his account, said to sit here while I go and pray over there. The place named Gethsemane means oil press. We noted earlier the Mount of Olives, or Olivet. While we are not told the specific time, we know that it was late that night that Jesus and his disciples came to Gethsemane. And so they may have arrived at Gethsemane between 10 and 11 o'clock at night, which according to Keener fits into that culture as being well into the night. John the apostle writes that there was a garden in 18 verse 1. When Jesus had spoken these words, he went out with his disciples over the brook Kidron, where there was a garden, which he and his disciples entered. In this particular setting, the garden which they entered was probably a grove of olive trees. John records that Jesus often met with his disciples, John 18:2, just as he was accustomed. Luke 18:39. Did Judas know this? Yes, he certainly did. And that's how he knew later the location to betray Jesus to the soldiers. In Matthew 26:36, Jesus told 8 of his 11 disciples, "Sit here while I go and pray over there." So after entering the garden, Jesus told the 8, "Sit here while I go over there." And so I imagine that he was still in sight while he went away from them. And he instructed them to pray. Luke 22:40. When he came to the place, he said to them, "Pray that you do not or may not enter into temptation." There would be temptation that night. Jesus had taught his disciples to pray earlier that they may not enter into temptation. And in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus taught his disciples, Matthew 6:13 and Luke 11:4. We see the Sermon on the Mount, and also in Luke's account of a different setting in Luke 11:4. The same message of how to pray. And do not lead us into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. And so, just as he taught his disciples earlier, now he is teaching them to pray that they do not enter into temptation. To be tempted is not sinful, but to yield to temptation is sin. In verse 37, Matthew writes, "And he took with him Peter and the 2 sons of Zebedee, and he began to be sorrowful and deeply distressed." So Jesus took his disciples, particularly Peter, James, and John, with him further into the garden at Gethsemane. In Mark 14:33, and he took Peter, James, and John with him, and he began to be troubled and deeply distressed. And so Matthew simply mentions the 2 men as sons of Zebedee, while Mark in his account identifies them by name as James and John, and of course Peter along with the brothers. There were times when only these 3 disciples were said to be with Jesus, and so perhaps Jesus was particularly close to them. We are not given the information, but we do see them together often. For instance, they were with Jesus at the Transfiguration in Matthew 17, Mark 9, and Luke 9. And they were instructed by Jesus to keep this to themselves until later. And they did until his resurrection. And we see this in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And Peter mentions this particularly in his epistle in 2 Peter 1:16 to 18. And so he did as Jesus said to do, and he remained silent until this time. We see also in Mark 1:29 that they were with him at the healing of Peter's mother-in-law. And also in Mark 5:37 and Luke 8:51, they were the only disciples permitted with Jesus at the raising of Jairus' daughter. And so in each of these instances, we see that it was Peter, James, and John who were along with Jesus in his company. Why? Well, perhaps Jesus took the 3 disciples with him because of what he knew he would experience. We do read in Mark 14:33 that he began to be troubled. And in Matthew 26:37 that he was sorrowful and deeply distressed, again at the thoughts of what was going to happen to him. Perhaps, according to Crane, that they were intended to bring him support and comfort. Well, that's possible. While he may have wanted their companionship, perhaps there was something more specifically related to the 3, Peter, James, and John. What could that be? Well, We know that it was James and John who said that they were able to drink the cup that Jesus would drink. Jesus had asked them, "Are you able to drink the cup that I drink?" And they said, "Yes." In Matthew 20, 22 to 23, Mark 10, 38 to 40. We also see, in addition to James and John, Peter in Matthew 26, 35 said to Jesus, when he was said that he would deny Jesus, Peter said, "Even if I have to die with you, I will not deny you." And so perhaps this is why he brought them with him at this occasion. Jesus now calls for Peter, James, and John to share with him in suffering as he prepares for his death on the cross. Matthew and Mark, in their accounts of the gospel, record the humanity of Jesus. Note the instances of the following words that were used in the New Testament. First, Matthew said that Jesus was sorrowful. For instance, in Matthew 17:23, when Jesus told his disciples how he would be betrayed and killed, they were sorrowful. Same word is used in those passages, Matthew and Mark. Likewise, when he told them that one of them would betray him, they were also sorrowful. Matthew 26:22. Same word, describing Jesus as being sorrowful. Second, Matthew said Jesus was deeply distressed. For instance, Epaphroditus was distressed. Why? Paul said, because he learned that the Philippians heard that he was sick. Philippians 2 and 26. Third, Mark adds that Jesus was troubled. Mark 14:33. In other instances, this same word is translated as amazed in Mark 9:15 and alarmed in Mark 16:5 to 6. And so perhaps Jesus troubled in the sense amazed or alarmed, but simply translated here as that he was troubled. We also learn in the book of Isaiah, the messianic prophet, in Isaiah 53, the prophecy of the Messiah, Isaiah 53 verse 3, that the prophet Isaiah prophesies of how the Messiah would be a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. He also, in verse 4, said of him, "Surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows." And so certainly this fits with what we see here. Matthew 26:38, then he said to them, "My soul is exceedingly sorrowful, even to death. Stay here and watch with me." So Jesus shares how he feels with Peter, James, and John. He says that his soul is exceedingly sorrowful. And so he's very sad. Same word is used in Luke 18:23. For instance, there was a rich young ruler who became very sorrowful because he had many possessions. And Jesus had told him to go and to sell what he had and give to the poor. Of course, he recognized that this man had a problem with covetousness. The psalmist wrote in Psalm 42 and 43, "Why are you cast down, O my soul?" The word cast down is literally bowed down. Why are you bowed down, O my soul? The Septuagint, a Greek translation of the Hebrew Scriptures, uses the same Greek term as Matthew does in the New Testament for exceedingly sorrowful. And so we might read the passage as, "Why are you cast down?" or "Why are you bowed down, O my soul? Why are you exceedingly sorrowful, O my soul?" The psalmist in Psalm 42 and 43 repeatedly reminds himself to hope in God. Our hope, our confident expectation based on faith, helps us to persevere in times of distress and sorrow. Jesus expresses the extent or degree of his sorrow as he approaches death, saying how that he is exceedingly sorrowful, even to death. Some translations read, to the point of death. Jonah in the Old Testament, Jonah 4 and 9, he said to God that he was angry even to death. And so describing the degree of his anger, in this case with Jesus, the degree of his sorrow. He tells his three disciples, Peter, James, and John, stay here and watch with me. Matthew emphasizes that Jesus wants their company. Stay here and watch with me. I asked earlier, why did he ask Peter, James, and John? Of course, their relationship to what they had said and being able to drink the cup and not denying him, even if he was taken away, that even if they had to die, that they would not leave him or deny him. And so here he is asking for them to accompany him. Stay here and watch with me. So Matthew emphasizes that he wants their company. He asks them to watch, which here means to keep awake or stay awake. Watch can mean figuratively to be vigilant or watchful in that sense, or as here to stay awake, not to fall asleep. However, the disciples failed to watch with Jesus, falling asleep that night. As Christians, we need to watch, not necessarily literally in the sense of staying awake, but in the sense of remaining spiritually vigilant or watchful, alert. For instance, the same word is translated watch in 1 Corinthians 16:13, where Paul says, watch, stand fast in the faith, be brave, be strong. And in Colossians 4 and verse 2, continue earnestly in prayer, being vigilant or watchful in it with thanksgiving. And so he has asked them to watch with him. And so Jesus was sorrowful. Number two, Jesus prayed the first time. Matthew 26:39-41. Verse 39, he went a little farther and fell on his face and prayed, saying, O my Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will. And so Jesus went a little farther, or he went beyond them. He then fell on his face. What does this mean? Well, that is, he prostrated himself, stretching out with his face on the ground. Mark says in 14:35 that he fell on the ground. So imagine Jesus getting down on the ground, prostrating himself. He stretches himself out on the ground with his face on the ground. And so he is as low as he can get. He addresses God in prayer. Oh, my Father, just as he taught his disciples to pray. Again, refer back to the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 6 and 9. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Jesus taught his disciples to pray. And so Jesus humbly and earnestly prayed, let this cup pass from me. Besides the cup, a metaphor for his suffering, Jesus also prayed in Mark 14:35 that the hour might pass from him. And so the time had come for Jesus to suffer. He asked James and John, are you able to drink the cup that I am about to drink? He had asked this earlier, prior to the garden, Matthew 20 and 22. Of course, they said yes. James and John said, yes, we are able. Jesus said, Father, if it is possible, We see in Mark 14:36, Father, all things are possible for you. While it was possible for the Father to take away the suffering, what would it mean for the salvation of humanity without the cost of redemption being paid? Without the Redeemer making redemption, offering the ransom of his own life, his own blood, where would any of us be? We would be lost, without hope. Yes, possible, but not God's will. He prayed, Father, if it is your will, take this cup away from me. Luke 22:42. You remember how Jesus later at the betrayal tells Peter to put away his sword. And he mentions how that he could have called for the angels to deliver him. And so it was possible he could have avoided going to the cross. But what would that mean for humanity? And what about God's will, his Father's will? Father, if it is your will, take this cup away from me. Mark wrote in Mark 14:36, Jesus said, Abba, Father, all things are possible for you. Take this cup away from me. Nevertheless, not what I will, but what you will. The word Abba is an Aramaic word meaning father. And so, Father, Father, all things are possible for you. This word rendered Abba is a term of trust and of affection and respect. It's also used in Romans 8:15 and Galatians 4 and 6. Of course, it's through Christ that we can be children of God and pray to him. Abba, Father. What about the hour? The Apostle John wrote in John 13:1, Jesus knew that his hour had come, that he should depart from this world to the Father. And in John 17:1, Jesus prayed, Father, the hour has come. Glorify your Son. So yes, the hour had arrived. Matthew 26:37, he took with him Peter and the two sons of Zebedee. He told them, stay here, verse 38. And he went a little farther and fell on his face and prayed, verse 39. And so he went a little farther, or as Luke records in his account, about a stone's throw. Well, you might ask, well, how far is a stone's throw? Well, I suppose it depends on how far you can throw a stone. But in this instance, a stone's throw is an expression or idiom meaning a little farther, just as Matthew writes in his account. And so about a stone's throw or a little farther. It means a short distance. Luke 22:41, and he was withdrawn from them about a stone's throw. And he knelt down and prayed, saying, Father, if it is your will, take this cup away from me. Nevertheless, not what I will, but yours be done. And so we see the desire of the Son to do his Father's will. Luke includes a record of the suffering of Jesus not recorded in Matthew or Mark. First, in Luke 22:43, Luke mentions an angel, the appearance of an angel in the garden. Luke 22:43, then an angel appeared to him from heaven, strengthening him. We also see that after the temptation of Jesus, the angel came and ministered to him. And so something similar happened earlier, the beginning of his ministry, when an angel came after the temptation by the devil, the tempter, and ministered to Jesus. Angels are also called ministering spirits in Hebrews 1 and 14. We're not told how the angels ministered to Jesus in the garden. We are only told that they did minister to him and that they were strengthening him. We know that God did not take away the cup. However, God did give Jesus the strength to drink it, to bear the suffering. We may often pray, does God answer our prayers? Yes, God does hear the prayer of the righteous. When we pray according to his will, God hears us. In this passage, we see that Jesus prays, but was his prayer heard? Yes, his prayer was heard and answered, and perhaps not in the way that we would think. But while the Father did not take away the cup or the hour from Jesus, we see that it was his will that he drink the cup, that he come to this hour, that he suffer for humanity. However, he did answer the prayer in that he strengthened him. He provided him strength to carry out his will. Second, Luke comments on his agony, the agony of Jesus in his earnest prayer. Luke 22:44, and being in agony, he prayed more earnestly. We might say that something was agonizing, but Jesus was in agony before he ever went to the cross. And so the night of his betrayal, he's in the garden, according to Luke, the physician, he's in the garden, he's in agony. Remember, considering his sorrow and distress, his trouble. It says, in being in agony, he prayed more earnestly, and then his sweat became like great drops of blood falling down to the ground. The term for agony, according to Vine's Expository Dictionary, was used to denote severe emotional strain and anguish. And so we can only imagine the stress that Jesus was experiencing at this time in the garden. And so he prays, and he prays repeatedly. Consider how that Jesus would suffer physically, but also mentally as well. And we have Jesus going to the cross, who was innocent, the innocent Son of God, and giving his life for our sins. We read in Isaiah's account how his justice was taken away. Even Pilate recognized that Jesus was an innocent man. Luke wrote, his sweat became like great drops of blood falling down to the ground. What did Luke mean by this? Again, only Luke mentions this in his account. There are different opinions about this matter, but let's consider two. Luke might be using a simile, a figure of speech, using like or as. For instance, the New King James reads, his sweat became like great drops of blood. Or the King James, his sweat became as it were great drops of blood. And so Luke may be using a simile to emphasize the agony of Jesus. And what does he mean then? Well, perhaps he's describing how Jesus was sweating profusely, like great drops of blood. Perhaps he's looking at the size of the drops of his sweat. And so he's sweating profusely in this time of agony. And so, yes, that's the possibility. He uses the word like or as in the passage. His sweat became like great drops of blood. It's also possible that Luke the physician literally referred to the excretion of blood through the skin. And there are accounts of people experiencing this condition, though rare. The word hematidrosis is a term used to describe this blood sweat. And it does happen, though rare. Some believe because a result of great stress, or in the case of Jesus, being in agony. Which one was it? Was it a simile? Or did he literally mean that he sweat great drops of blood? Well, like suggests a simile. This is a figure of speech, though it's possible that he could have experienced this literally or actually. Either one is possible. We see that Christ prayed and answered. Hebrews 5 and verse 7, who in the days of his flesh, when he had offered up prayers and supplications with vehement cries and tears to him who was able to save him from death, and was heard because of his godly fear. Note that Jesus was heard, according to the Hebrew writer, because of his godly fear. And so this adds something else to the account of Jesus' prayer in the garden. This does not mean that he was afraid. In this particular case, fear, godly fear, refers to his reverence or his reverent submission to his Father. Jesus, who prayed, not my will, but your will be done. And so he was not afraid, but prayed to God with reverence, or he submitted to his Father with reverence. And so God heard him, and he sent the angel and strengthened him. According to Mounce in the New Testament, it is reverence to God or piety. Matthew 26:40, then he came to the disciples and found them sleeping and said to Peter, what? Could you not watch with me 1 hour? Jesus said, stay here and watch with me. That's what he said earlier, Matthew 26:38. After praying, Jesus found Peter, James, and John sleeping. Mark 14:37, he came and found them sleeping and said to Peter, Simon, are you sleeping? Could you not watch 1 hour? 1 hour could be figurative or it could be literal. 1 hour could indicate the time that Jesus prayed. The 1 hour could indicate that the disciples slept for an hour. And that's possible. Luke offers sorrow as the reason why they were sleeping. If Jesus and the disciples went to Gethsemane around 10 or 11 at night, they might have been there in the garden till midnight or after. In Luke 22:45, when he rose up from prayer and had come to his disciples, he found them sleeping from sorrow. And so Luke provides an explanation for why they were sleeping. They were sleeping because of sorrow. And we already mentioned how they experienced sorrow when being told that Jesus would die and when told that one of them would betray him. And now they're sleeping in the garden from sorrow. Jesus first directed his words to Peter, particularly, perhaps because of what Peter had told Jesus confidently. Matthew chapter 26:33, Peter said that he would never be made to stumble or caused to take offense at Jesus. Peter exclaimed that even if he had to die, he would not deny him. Verse 35, which we remember Peter at the courtyard as Jesus is being questioned prior to going to the cross. And when he saw him being questioned, and he was asked himself if he was one of Jesus' disciples or if he knew him. And Peter said, I do not know the man. And he denied him 3 times. When he realized what he had done, he looked at Jesus, he realized what he had done, and he went out and wept bitterly. Here in the garden, Jesus exclaims, what? Some translations translate this Greek term as so. So you could not watch with me 1 hour? And so he may be saying this in rebuke. Spiritually, there is need for Christians to watch or stay awake and exercise vigilance today. Watch because your adversary, as a roaring lion, walks about seeking whom he may devour. That's what Peter said. Consider what is happening here. Of course, Jesus warned Peter that the devil wanted to sift him like wheat. Of course, he prayed for Peter. Here, Jesus is telling them, watch and pray lest you enter into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak. Mark's account reads the same. Luke writes in 22:46, then he said to them, why do you sleep? Rise and pray lest you enter into temptation. Jesus said, watch and pray. And so they needed to keep watching and keep praying in order to avoid the temptation, such as denying him or fleeing, running away, forsaking him. He taught his disciples to pray, and do not lead us into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. Matthew 6:13, again, looking back to the Sermon on the Mount earlier. We know the disciples would be tempted to forsake him and run away, just like they would do. Mark 14:50, then they all forsook him and fled. In this context of Matthew 26:41, the flesh refers to the body, the physical body, which is physically weak and becomes tired. And so some translations read, watch and pray, or keep watching and praying, or stay awake and pray. He said the spirit is willing. This is also translated in Romans 1:15, the New King James, as ready. And so according to Vine, it's expressive of willingness or eagerness. And so he says the spirit is willing or ready or eager, or expressing this willingness, but the flesh is weak. The temptation in view here is denying Jesus. Again, Jesus predicted of his disciples, you will be made to stumble because of me. You will deny me. Number 3, Jesus prayed the second time, verses 42 and 43. Again, a second time he went away and prayed, saying, O my Father, if this cup cannot pass away from me unless I drink it, your will be done. The first time he went away, or he went a little farther, Matthew 26:39. And now a second time he went away and prayed, verse 42. So Jesus repeated his prayer. According to Mark 14:39, again he went away and prayed and spoke the same words. He did indeed speak the same words. There's some variation, but the same thought is expressed. There's variations in the words that he used, but it's basically the same. We see that his prayer is conditional both times. Now, while the first time the condition is positive, that is, if it is possible, the second time the condition is negative. The second time his petition to the Father is, let this cup pass from me, is removed. It's removed from the prayer. So there is the condition each time with this slight difference. His tentative request is, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Is now, if this cup cannot pass away from me unless I drink it. And so note the difference. Now, before Jesus prayed, he said, not as I will, but as you will. But now the main clause is, your will be done, verse 42. And so your will must be done. Jesus prayed as he taught his disciples to pray. Again, looking back to the model prayer, Matthew 6:10, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And so Jesus is doing just as he taught his disciples. Verse 43, and he came and found them asleep again, for their eyes were heavy. So Jesus came back and found his disciples sleeping. Matthew explains they're sleeping, for their eyes were heavy. Sometimes you might have used this expression, saying that your eyes were heavy. You couldn't keep your eyes open. And so we have here an idiom for becoming very sleepy. However, not only were their eyes heavy, but he found them sleeping from sorrow. We already noted that earlier. Again, they had been through a lot that day. For instance, Jesus predicted one of them would betray him, that they would be made to stumble, and that Peter would deny him. And so that's a lot to take in. And so we could understand why they were sleeping from sorrow. Sometimes people, when they are sorrowful, they cannot sleep. Other times people stay in bed out of sorrow, not getting up. Jesus had said, "Stay here and watch." And when he returned, he said, "Could you not watch with me 1 hour?" And again he said, "Watch and pray." So from Mark's account, after Jesus again returned to them, he spoke to them. Mark 14:40. So then he returned, he found them asleep again, for their eyes were heavy, and they did not know what to answer him. They didn't know what to say. What could they say? We are not told what Jesus said to his disciples, but Mark writes that they did not know what to answer or what to say. They may have been embarrassed. While they might give a reason for sleeping, they could not excuse staying awake, or they could offer no excuse for not staying awake. Number 4, Jesus prayed the third time in verses 44 to 46. So he left them and went away again and prayed the third time, saying the same words. He prayed the third time. Now, Matthew might have contrasted this with Peter's denials. How Jesus said to Peter, "You will deny me 3 times." I don't know if it's coincidence, or perhaps this may be the reason, or perhaps some other reason. But anyway, we see that Matthew writes about both. The third time that he prayed, and also with the 3 times that he would deny Jesus. So Jesus taught in Matthew 5, had taught in Matthew 5 and 7, and when you pray, do not use vain repetitions as the heathen do. Did Jesus use vain repetitions? No, he did not. Vain repetitions, or meaningless, thoughtless repetitions when he prayed? No, he did not do so. In fact, he prayed with humility and earnestness these 3 times. The records say that he fell on his face and prayed. He fell on the ground and prayed, and he knelt down and prayed. We see this picture of his earnestness and his humbleness, lowliness. It also says that he prayed more earnestly. In Luke 22:44. Prayed more earnestly or fervently, intensely. Verse 45, then he came to his disciples and said to them, "Are you still sleeping and resting?" So Jesus came to his disciples, Peter, James, and John. According to Mark, he came the third time. And Jesus rebukes them, saying, "Are you still sleeping and resting?" Mark adds the words, "It is enough." Are you still sleeping and resting? It is enough. Mark 14:41. This question can be translated as a command, and it is in some translations, such as the King James and in the American Standard Version. And so Jesus may have said with irony, "Sleep on now and take your rest. It is enough." And so perhaps he said with irony, "Well, go ahead and sleep, because I no longer need you to watch with me. The time has come." So either way, of course, it would be true. Here in the New King James, it translates it as a question. Are you still sleeping and resting? If that's the case, then it would be a mild rebuke. He no longer had need for them to watch with him or to rebuke them further, as it was time to meet his betrayer. He said, "Behold, the hour is at hand, and the Son of Man is being betrayed into the hands of sinners." In preparation for Passover, Jesus had instructed his disciples to say that he said, "My time is at hand." Matthew 26:18. At the institution of the Lord's Supper, Luke wrote, "When the hour had come, he sat down, and the 12 apostles with him." Luke 22:14. And so his hour had come, just as John records in his book. Consider what Jesus said the previous day, that is, the day prior to him praying in the garden. John 12:27, "My soul is troubled, and what shall I say? Father, save me from this hour? But for this purpose I came to this hour." I suppose this is as close as John gets to recording the agony in the garden. Here we see John's record of what Jesus had said the previous day. While Matthew focuses on the prophecy of his suffering, saying the hour is at hand, Mark places emphasis on how the time has come for his betrayal. Mark 14:41, "The hour has come, behold, the Son of Man is being betrayed into the hands of sinners." Strong language. Hands of sinners. Jesus predicted that along with his death and resurrection, that he would be betrayed. 1, 2, 3 times. For instance, the second and third time, we see that he particularly mentions how that along with his death and resurrection, that he would be betrayed. He predicted that it was one of his disciples who would betray him. And so he went from general to specific. After the supper, he predicted that the disciples would flee. And Peter later preached that Jesus of Nazareth, who was betrayed into the hands of sinners, is both Lord and Christ. He said on Pentecost in Acts 2:23, "Him you have taken by lawless hands, have crucified and put to death." And so similar to what is recorded earlier, being betrayed into the hands of sinners. Jesus said, "Rise, let us be going. See, my betrayer is at hand." Of course, if he told them to go ahead and sleep, they didn't have very long to sleep, because soon after he says, "Let's get up. Get up and let's go." And so Jesus tells his disciples to get up, let's go. Let us be going. The one who is betraying me is at hand, or near. Jesus would not run or hide. He would not slip away. He would go to confront Judas, who betrayed him, and those who would come to arrest him and take him away, to try him, and later to send him to the cross. As it was night, John 13:30, the disciples could no doubt see the light of the lanterns and the torches approaching in the night. John 18:3, "Then Judas, having received a detachment of troops and officers from the chief priests and Pharisees, came there with lanterns, torches, and weapons." So picture them up on the mount, and they see the lanterns and the torches coming, and they go down to meet them. The detachment of troops and officers came to arrest Jesus, and it was Judas who identified Jesus to the people. Of course, it was nighttime, perhaps difficult to see. And so Judas betrayed Jesus with a kiss, which should have showed his affection for Jesus. Prior to being arrested and bound, Jesus said to Peter, "Put your sword into the sheath. Shall I not drink the cup which my Father has given me?" Yes, he would. He would suffer for Peter and James and John and everyone else, for us today. Here's some things to consider. Pray to God, especially when things are most difficult. Sometimes when things are their most trying, some people turn away from God. It's at that time that we should turn to him and trust him all the more. We should also know that it's okay to be sad. The disciples were sorrowful. Even Jesus was sorrowful, troubled, and distressed at this time in his life. We also should seek the support of others when we are in need. Jesus loved all the disciples. However, he had what we might call his inner circle. We don't have all the details. Why Peter, James, and John? But perhaps they were his closest friends. We also learn to be humble and ask the Father, but always put him and his will ahead of our own. We learn to pray lest we enter into temptation. We may be willing, but the flesh is weak. We also note that it is all right to pray repeatedly for the same thing if we pray earnestly in our prayers. The question today for you is, have you become a Christian? Hear, believe, repent, confess, and be baptized. Also, if you are a Christian, have you been faithful to Christ? If not, repent and pray that you may be forgiven. We hope the lesson has been beneficial today and that you would continue to seek the Lord in all that you do. Until next time, God bless.